Get out of my seat, right now." The words did not arrive as a question. They did not arrive as a request. They arrived the way a verdict arrives, certain final delivered before a single piece of evidence had been examined. They cut through the low hum of the first-class cabin on Flight 407 like something that had been sharpened for exactly this moment, and every head in rows 1 through 6 turned toward the sound. The man standing in the aisle was not whispering. He had no interest in whispering. Douglas Whitfield planted his feet wide on the navy carpet, gripped the edge of the overhead compartment with one thick hand, and stared down at the woman in seat 2. With the expression of a man who had never, not once in 54 years on this earth, been told that something he wanted did not belong to him. The woman in seat 2A did not move. Her name was Naomi Caldwell. She was 45 years old. She was dressed in a dark navy blazer over a simple white blouse, dark trousers, a pair of low black heels she had worn on 100 flights before this one. Her natural hair was pulled back cleanly. A small gold watch on her left wrist caught the muted light of the cabin. In her lap rested a document she had been reading. Printed pages held together with a single binder clip dense with numbers and contract language that would have meant very little to most people on this plane. On the floor beside her left ankle sat a worn leather briefcase, the kind that had been carried so many times its corners had softened and its brass clasps had lost their shine. She did not look like someone who owned anything in particular. That was the point. She let 4 full seconds pass before she looked up. Not because she was startled, not because she needed time to understand what was happening. She looked up after 4 seconds because she had learned over the course of a lifetime of exactly these moments that the most powerful thing she could do with her eyes was choose precisely when to use them. She looked at him. He flinched just slightly before recovering. "This is my seat," he said again. His face was already red. A sheen of sweat had appeared along his collar even in the cool recycled air of the cabin. He clutched a crumpled boarding pass in his right hand and held it out toward her the way people hold out documents when they want the document to do the threatening for them. "I don't know how you ended up here, but I've flown this route for 12 years, and I always sit in 2A. Always." Naomi held his gaze for 1 more second. Then she looked back down at her document. "I have my boarding pass," she said. She said it the way she said most things, without volume, without performance, without any particular urgency. She said it, and then she continued reading because the sentence was complete and she had nothing to add to it. The silence that followed was approximately 3 seconds long. In those 3 seconds, at least 11 passengers shifted in their seats. A woman in row 3 set down her glass of water. A man in row 5 leaned slightly forward. The 2 flight attendants, visible at the front of the cabin, exchanged a glance across the narrow galley that said, without words, "Here we go." Douglas Whitfield was not done. "Your boarding pass," he said with a particular brand of contempt that people use when they want to make a word sound like a lie just by the way they pronounce it. "Right. You know what, I don't care what piece of paper you've got. That seat has been mine every time I've flown this route, and I'm not about to be pushed out of it because somebody decided to play games with the upgrade system." He shifted his weight. He leaned in slightly closer. His shadow fell across the top of Naomi's document. She did not look up. "Some people," he said, and his voice dropped just enough to make it feel deliberate, make it feel like the volume was a choice rather than a restraint, "just don't know when they don't belong somewhere." The gasp from row 3 was audible. Not loud, but real. The kind of sound a person makes when something they hoped they weren't hearing confirms itself. In seat 3, a man named Marco Reyes, 33 years old, travel photographer, a professional Canon camera resting on his knee as naturally as a pen in a writer's hand, reached down and pressed a single button. His camera was already on. It had been on since he boarded. He was documenting a travel series. That was his explanation later for why he had footage of everything that followed. The truth was simpler. He had watched Doug Whitfield board this plane, and something in the way the man moved through the world had made Marco quietly, instinctively press record. In seat 4, B, a woman named Diane Forsyth, set her novel face down on her tray table. She was 64 years old. She had retired from 34 years of teaching 4th grade in Columbus, Ohio. She had a rule when she traveled alone: don't get involved in other people's business. She had made this rule after an incident on a train in 2019 that she would rather not revisit. She was already reconsidering it. Naomi Caldwell had not moved, had not flinched, had not raised her voice or her eyes or her hands. She sat in seat 2A with her document in her lap and her worn leather briefcase at her ankle, and something in her expression that was not quite patience and not quite stillness, but was something between the two, something that looked from a distance like a woman waiting, not waiting to be rescued, not waiting for permission. Waiting the way a person waits when they already know how something ends and they are simply allowing the middle to finish. The departure board above the jetway blinked once. New information appeared on the screen. Flight 407, JFK to London Heathrow. Departure delayed. No reason given. No estimated new time. Just the word delayed. In exactly 23 minutes, this plane would not go anywhere. Not because of a mechanical failure. Not because of weather rolling in off the Atlantic. Not because of anything in the cockpit or the engine or the fuel line. Because of what was sitting in seat 2A. Because of what was inside that worn leather briefcase. Because of who Naomi Caldwell was, and because of what the man standing over her was about to spend the next 23 minutes proving he had never bothered to find out. He had no idea. He was about to. Flight 407 was a night flight, the kind that business travelers prefer, because it disappears the discomfort of a long journey into hours that are supposed to be unconscious anyway. JFK to London Heathrow, 11 hours and 40 minutes in the air if the jet stream was cooperative, departing at 11:40 p.m. and arriving in a London morning gray with early clouds. Transatlantic Airways operated the route 6 times weekly. It was a profitable route. It was quietly one of the most profitable routes in the airline's portfolio. First class on Flight 407 was 8 rows, 16 seats arranged in a configuration that gave each passenger their own small world. A lie flat seat, a privacy partition, a reading light warm enough to work by and dim enough to sleep under. The carpet was navy. The panels were cream. The seat covers were a dark charcoal that photographed expensively. The attendants moved through this space with a practiced quiet, as if sound itself was a service they were trained to minimize. This was the kind of space that was designed to feel inevitable, as if the people sitting in it had always been going to sit here, as if arrival at this level of comfort was not the result of specific decisions and specific money and specific luck, but simply a natural consequence of being the kind of person who ended up here. The design was deliberate. The message was constant, subtle, and absolutely intentional. You belong here. You have always belonged here. Unless, of course, someone decided you didn't. Naomi Caldwell had boarded Flight 407 at Gate 34B at 11:02 p.m., 38 minutes before scheduled departure. She had boarded alone. She carried nothing but the worn leather briefcase and a small personal bag slung over one shoulder. No rolling luggage. No assistant walking 2 steps behind her managing her calendar on a tablet. No designer, anything visible. She wore her gold watch the way people wear things they have stopped thinking about. Automatically, comfortably, without performance. She had checked in under a corporate account registered to Meridian Global Holdings. The booking showed transatlantic gold status. The highest tier the airline offered the kind that came with priority boarding, complimentary upgrades, and a direct line to a dedicated service team. The gate agent had not recognized her name. That was as Naomi had intended, perfectly fine. She had a rule she kept without exception. Once per quarter she booked a flight under the corporate card, wore no labels, carried no visible markers of rank or wealth, and traveled the way most people travel, as a private person, legible only as herself. She called it, in the privacy of her own mind, the reality check. It reminded her what the experience was actually like. It reminded her what she was building and who she was building it for. And it reminded her reliably, without fail, that the world had not yet changed as much as the press releases suggested. She was 45 years old. She had been born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, the only child of Irene Caldwell, who had worked 2 jobs for 22 years. Nights cleaning the offices of a downtown law firm, days as a cashier at a grocery store 4 blocks from their apartment. Naomi had been a scholarship student at every level high school Howard University Wharton School of Business. She had graduated Wharton with a 3.97 GPA and exactly $42,000 in student loans, which she had paid off in 31 months. She had founded Meridian Global Holdings at age 27 in a 1-room office in Baltimore's Harbor East neighborhood with a second-hand desk, a refurbished laptop, and a business plan she had drafted in longhand in the margins of a legal pad. 18 years later, Meridian was a $4.2 billion holding company with assets in technology, real estate, and aviation. Specifically, a 54% controlling stake in Transatlantic Airways, acquired 3 years ago in a transaction that the financial press had called one of the most surprising deals of the decade. Nobody on Flight 407 knew any of this. That was the point of the reality check. The worn leather briefcase at her ankle held 2 things: the folder containing the latest transatlantic board documents she had been reviewing before Doug Whitfield's voice had entered the cabin, and her phone with Lena Cruz on speed dial. Lena was Naomi's executive assistant, based in Meridian's New York office, awake and at her desk at this hour, because Naomi had told her to be. Lena was 28, born in San Antonio, precise as a scalpel, and had been with Naomi for 4 years. She did not panic. She was, Naomi had once told a colleague, the most competent person in any room she entered. At 11:08 p.m., before Doug Whitfield's voice had turned ugly, before the crumpled boarding pass had appeared before any of it, Naomi had sent Lena a single text. It said, "Watching." Lena had replied in 11 seconds on standby. "Marco Reyes just boarded. His account has 280,000. His camera is out." Naomi had not responded. She had opened her document. Douglas Whitfield was a regional vice president at Halloran Industrial, a Cincinnati-based manufacturer of industrial fasteners with annual revenues just under $800 million. He had been with the company for 19 years. He had the title and the salary and the company credit card and the business travel that came with it, and he wore all of these things the way some men wear their identity, on the outside where it could be confirmed by other people. He was flying to London for a supplier negotiation he had described to his colleague as worth $2 million. He had been looking forward to this trip. He had told his wife about the hotel. He had silver tier status on Transatlantic. Not gold. Silver. The distinction mattered to him in a way that was disproportionate to what it actually entitled him to, which was priority boarding only on routes where seats were available and a 20% discount on seat upgrades when purchased at booking. He had not purchased a seat upgrade. He had arrived at the gate and asked the gate agent, a young woman named Ashley who was managing 3 things at once, if seat 2A was available. Ashley had looked, said it was occupied, and Doug had said he always flew 2A on this route, and could she please just check again. Ashley had checked again, seen the gold status booking on 2A, and started to say that the seat was confirmed for another passenger, and Doug had said, "Well, can you just print a new boarding pass for me for that seat, and I'll sort it out on the plane." And Ashley, managing 3 things at once with 6 minutes until boarding closed, had printed it. This was the crumpled boarding pass in his right hand. It was not a valid claim. It was a mistake wrapped in a sense of entitlement and printed on thermal paper. He did not know this. He was completely certain he was right. Marco Reyes had the seat in 3A directly behind Naomi, which gave him a clean sightline past the partition and into the aisle where Doug now stood. He was on assignment for a travel magazine, 4 weeks documenting premium long-haul routes across 3 airlines, shooting the experience from a passenger's perspective. He had photographed things that mattered before a refugee camp in Greece, a wildfire in California, a school board meeting in Tennessee that had turned into something else entirely. He knew what it looked like when an ordinary moment was about to become a document. He pressed record. He kept his camera at knee level. He said nothing. In seat 4, B. Diane Forsyth watched the confrontation over the top of her novel with the practiced stillness of a woman who had managed 26 10-year-olds at a time for 3 decades. She recognized the dynamic in front of her. She had seen versions of it in classrooms, in parent-teacher conferences, in staff meetings where certain people were heard and certain people were talked over. She had a rule about not getting involved. She was already aware that the rule was going to be tested tonight. Rosa Medina stood at the rear of the first-class cabin near the galley curtain and watched Patricia Owens move toward the confrontation with the smooth efficiency of a woman who had de-escalated 100 seat disputes. Rosa had been flying for 8 months. She had de-escalated approximately 12. She watched Patricia's body language as the senior attendant approached the row, and something quiet and uncomfortable coiled in Rosa's stomach, because Patricia was moving toward Doug first. Not toward Naomi, toward Doug. Rosa stayed where she was, for now. Doug Whitfield had not gotten what he wanted from silence, and silence was not a tool he was particularly practiced in using anyway. He shifted his boarding pass from his right hand to his left and raised his voice by approximately 20%, not shouting but projecting. The way a man projects when he wants the people around him to understand that he is the wronged party and he would like witnesses. "Excuse me," he said, turning his head toward the front of the cabin. "Miss, could I get some help here? There's been some kind of mistake." Patricia Owens was already moving. She was 52 years old, 18 years with transatlantic, and she had the practiced expression of someone who had learned to arrive at conflict looking like resolution. Her smile was thin and professional. Her eyes assessed the situation in the 2 seconds it took her to cover the distance from the galley to row 2-man standing woman, seated boarding passes in play tension already filling the cabin air like humidity before a storm. "Of course," she said, arriving at the row with the smooth efficiency of someone who has done this before. "What seems to be the issue?" "The issue," Doug said, "is that this woman is in my seat. I always fly 2A on this route. I have a boarding pass that says 2A. I'd like someone to sort this out so we can get this plane in the air." Patricia turned to Naomi. "Ma'am, do you have your boarding pass available?" Naomi reached into her briefcase without haste, withdrew her boarding pass, and held it out. Patricia took both documents. Her eyes moved between them. Both said, "Seat 2A." A flicker of something, confusion or recognition or the early stages of a decision already being made, passed over her face. She pulled out the handheld device from her jacket pocket and checked the system. The scan took 7 seconds. During those 7 seconds, Doug shifted his weight twice and exhaled once through his nose. Naomi looked out the window. The system showed what Rosa had already seen from the rear of the cabin when she had quietly checked her own handheld during the first 60 seconds of the confrontation. Seat 2. A confirmed booking transatlantic gold status, Meridian Global Corporate Account. Checked in remotely 4 hours ago. Valid in every respect. Doug's boarding pass was a gate-printed duplicate. The system flagged it as an error issuance within seconds of the scan. Patricia looked at the screen. She looked at Doug. She looked at Naomi. She turned to Naomi first. "Ma'am, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name." "Caldwell." Naomi said without turning from the window, "Ms. Caldwell, we have a bit of a conflict in the system. Would you mind just moving to 2B temporarily while we sort this out?" The question landed in the cabin like a stone dropped into still water. Diane Forsyth in 4B blinked. Marco's camera held steady. Rosa, at the back of the cabin, pressed her lips together. Naomi turned from the window. She looked at Patricia with the same measured calm she had applied to everything else in the last 5 minutes. She said exactly 4 words. "I'm comfortable right here." The 4 words were not aggressive. They were not theatrical. They were simply the most complete possible response to the question. A statement of fact delivered without apology and without any indication that further discussion was being invited. The silence that followed them was different from the previous silences. It had shape to it. It occupied the cabin the way weather occupies a room when someone opens a window in a storm. Doug broke it. He made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a scoff, the sound of a man who has decided to perform his frustration for an audience. "She's comfortable. That's rich." He turned to Patricia with the expression of someone who expects institutional support and intends to collect it. "Patricia, is it I'm a 12-year customer of this airline. I have silver status. This seat has been mine every time I've flown this route, and I would appreciate it very much if you would handle this before we lose our departure window." Patricia hesitated, the exact kind of hesitation that in a different context might look like fair-mindedness, but here looked exactly like what it was a woman weighing 2 people and finding one of them more credible based on something other than the evidence in her hand. "Sir," she said, turning to Doug with a tone that was perceptibly warmer than the one she had used with Naomi. "Why don't you take 2B for now while I—" Doug cut her off. "Absolutely not." His voice had risen another 10%. "I didn't pay for 2B. I've never sat in 2B. I'm not sitting in 2B. Patricia stood between them. The handheld still in her hand, the evidence of Doug's erroneous boarding pass sitting in its memory, and she did not say what the handheld said. Rosa Medina, watching from the galley, checked her own handheld for the 2nd time. The system said the same thing it had said 3 minutes ago. She took 1 step forward. Stopped. Patricia was senior. Patricia would handle it. Rosa waited. In seat 3, a Marco's Instagram counter had begun its climb from 12 viewers to something larger. He had typed a caption with his free hand while keeping the camera level. "Something's happening in first class right now." He did not specify what. He did not need to. The comments were already beginning small and questioning the first few bubbles of what would become a very large wave. In seat 4, B. Diane Forsyth had attempted to return to her novel. The attempt lasted approximately 90 seconds, during which she read the same sentence 4 times without absorbing a single word. She placed the novel on her tray table face down. She did not pick it up again. In seat 5, a Tom Briggs, 47 sales director, wide shoulders, the kind of man who fills a room with his presence before he said anything, caught Doug's eye across the aisle and gave a small nod. It was the micro-agreement of men who recognize each other as belonging to the same unspoken category, men who expect things and usually receive them. Tom would spend the next 20 minutes periodically regretting that nod. He would spend considerably longer than 20 minutes regretting the things he had not said. Doug, emboldened by Patricia's implicit support, turned his volume up another notch. The performance was escalating now, moving from a man with a complaint to a man building a case in public. "Look," he said, addressing Patricia but pitching his voice to Carrie. "I don't know what kind of upgrade this was or how it got processed, but I can promise you that whoever put her in this seat made a mistake. This is first class. People earn their way in here. There's a process. There's a reason these seats cost what they cost." Naomi turned a page in her document. The movement was small, unhurried. She turned the page the way a person turns a page when they are genuinely reading, and the next page is the natural place to go. She did not look up. She did not respond. She simply continued doing what she had been doing before Doug Whitfield had put his hand on the overhead compartment and decided that her presence required explanation. This was the move that infuriated him most. Not her words, her indifference. The fact that his escalation, the gathering audience, the raised voice, the invocation of his loyalty and his money and the 12 years he had flown this route had produced in her no visible response whatsoever. Not anxiety, not performance, not the defensive energy he was expecting. He leaned in slightly closer. His voice dropped to something that was meant to sound like a private comment, but was deliberately pitched to be heard by the 4 rows immediately surrounding them. "Must be nice," he said, "to sit somewhere you don't belong and act like it's completely normal." The sentence was a specific kind of sentence. It did not make an accusation in language that could be easily quoted back. It was a sentence with deniability engineered into it. The kind of thing a man says when he wants to wound without leaving marks. Must be nice. As if her presence were a gift she hadn't earned. As if the seat she had booked and paid for and arrived at and held and was continuing to hold were something borrowed from a world she had no native claim to. Marco's viewer, count 47. A comment appeared on the screen. "Is that guy for real?" Diane Forsyth did not pick up her book. Rosa Medina took another step forward, stopped again, watched Patricia. Patricia made the choice that would haunt her for the next 18 months. She turned to Naomi. Her voice carried the particular quality of apology directed at the wrong person. "Miss Caldwell, I'm going to have to ask you to bear with us just a little longer. We're doing our best to—" "Patricia?" Naomi looked up from her document. She looked at the senior flight attendant with a steadiness that was not unkind but was also absolutely clear. "You have both boarding passes. You have the system in your hand. The system has already told you what the answer is. You don't need to ask me to bear with anything. You need to read what your device is telling you." Patricia's hand tightened slightly on the handheld. She held it at her side and looked from Naomi to Doug and back again, and in the geography of where she pointed her body next, she told the entire cabin everything it needed to know about what she believed. She turned toward Doug. "Sir," she said, "let me see what I can do." Behind her, Naomi closed her document. She did not close it with frustration. She closed it with the deliberate care of a woman who has realized that reading is no longer the task at hand, and who is now preparing for what is. The first escalation had ended. The sides had been chosen, and every person in rows 1 through 6 who had been pretending not to watch had just received a very clear picture of how this crew intended to handle things. Rosa Medina walked back to the galley. She checked the handheld one more time. The system had not changed its answer. She stood with the device in her hand looking at the screen and said nothing to anyone. "Not yet. Before we go any further, I want to hear from you. If you were sitting in that cabin right now watching this play out, would you have said something? Would you have spoken up, or would you have looked at your phone, looked at the seat back in front of you and decided it wasn't your place? Drop your answer in the comments below and tell us what city you're watching from. If this story already has your hands tight on something, a phone, an armrest, anything, hit that subscribe button because what Naomi does next is something none of those passengers were prepared for. Now, let's go back. Because to understand why Naomi Caldwell sat perfectly still in seat 2, while a man stood over her and told her she didn't belong, you need to understand where she learned to stay. The memory arrived without an invitation, the way memories do when the present moment echoes something the body has not forgotten. Naomi was 17 years old. It was July. Baltimore. The kind of July that sits on you, thick, windless, the heat rising off the pavement in visible waves by mid-afternoon and still radiating back up from the sidewalk at 10 o'clock at night. Her mother, Irene Caldwell, worked the overnight cleaning shift at Hartwell and Burke, a law firm on the 14th and 15th floors of a building on Calvert Street downtown. The shift ran from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. 5 nights a week. On the nights when school was out and Naomi had no particular reason to be home, She would sometimes take the number 14 bus downtown and wait for her mother in the lobby. She brought a book. She sat in one of the upholstered chairs along the east wall, the ones that were there for clients waiting for meetings, and she read. She was good at being invisible when she needed to be. She had been practicing that particular skill since she was old enough to understand when it was safer than the alternative. On the night she was remembering now, sitting in seat 2A with Doug Whitfield's voice still hanging in the cabin air, she had been there for about 40 minutes when the security guard on the overnight desk noticed her. He was white. He was in his mid-40s. He was not hostile exactly. His face had more of the quality of mild inconvenience than open aggression. He walked over slowly, hands in his pockets, and stopped in front of the chair she was sitting in. "Hey," he said, "this lobby is for employees and clients of the building." "I know," Naomi said. She explained that she was waiting for her mother, who was on the cleaning crew upstairs. She explained that she did this sometimes. She had her library card in her hand for no particular reason, as if something had known she might need to demonstrate that she was the kind of person who carried a library card. The guard looked at her. He looked at the library card. He looked at the chair she was sitting in, which was the same chair she sat in every time she came here, which was the same chair any client or employee or visitor to this lobby had the right to sit in at any hour. "I'm going to need you to wait outside," he said. He was not cruel. He did not raise his voice. He just looked at her the way certain people look at certain other people in certain spaces, the way that says, without specific language, that the presence of the person being looked at is a problem that needs to be solved. She picked up her book. She went outside. She sat on the front steps of the building in the July heat and waited for 40 minutes until the elevator doors opened at 4 a.m. and her mother walked out. Irene Caldwell saw her daughter on the steps and stopped walking. Something happened in her face. Not shock, not sadness exactly, but something in between the two. Something that looked like recognition, like confirmation of a thing she had been hoping would not arrive yet. She sat down on the steps beside Naomi. She put her arm around her. After a moment, Naomi said, "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know," baby Irene said. "He just told me to leave. I wasn't doing anything." "I know." They sat for a minute. The street was quiet. A bus went by 2 blocks over. Irene's cleaning uniform smelled like floor polish and the particular industrial-grade soap the firm used in its bathrooms. Then Irene said something that Naomi had been turning over in her mind for 28 years. "Some spaces will always try to tell you that you don't belong. That's not going to stop. The question is whether you believe them." Naomi did not understand it fully that night. She was 17. She was tired and embarrassed and quietly furious in the way of young people who have just been handed the first clear evidence of something they had been trying to avoid knowing. She nodded at her mother's words because she loved her mother. She did not yet understand them. She understood them at 22. She was on her very first business class seat, bought with the first real paycheck from her first real job, a consulting analyst position in Washington, D.C., a treat she had promised herself, and then almost talked herself out of 3 times at the ticket window. She sat down in 4C, put her bag in the overhead, opened her laptop, and 2 minutes later the man in 4B, white 50s suit jacket folded over the seat in front of him, leaned over and asked in a tone of helpful concern, "Are you sure you're in the right row, honey?" She had smiled. She had shown him her boarding pass. She had spent the entire 2-hour flight looking at her laptop screen without processing a word on it. When she landed, she walked to the parking structure and sat in her car for 6 minutes before she drove. She made herself a promise in that parking structure. She made it quietly with no witnesses in the particular way that promises made in parking structures after long days tend to hold more than the ones made in public. The next time, she would not smile. She would not perform gratitude for a space she had earned. She would not explain herself as if her presence were a hypothesis that required proof. She would simply stay. She would remain exactly where she was, and she would let the world do what it was going to do, and she would not make herself smaller to accommodate it. 23 years later, in a first-class seat on a flight she owned, she was keeping that promise. She did not need anyone in this cabin to believe her. She did not need Patricia to read her handheld. She did not need Doug Whitfield to understand anything about her. She needed exactly what she had: her boarding pass, her briefcase, and 45 years of practice at remaining exactly where she was when the world suggested she leave. Her mother was 71 years old now. She lived in a house in Baltimore that Naomi had bought for her in 2015. She did not take the number 14 bus anymore. She had a garden and a porch and a television and a group of friends she played cards with on Wednesdays. She had never cleaned another office floor. "That's why I stay," Naomi thought, looking out the oval window at the dark tarmac, at the luggage carts moving in the yellow-white wash of the runway lights. "That's why I don't move." Doug Whitfield had been standing in the aisle for 11 minutes. He had tried volume. He had tried an attendant. He had tried implied threat. He had tried the particular brand of performative frustration that had, in his experience, reliably moved obstacles. None of it had moved Naomi Caldwell by a single inch. This was for a man who had spent 54 years understanding himself as the kind of person who moved through the world without friction, a profoundly disorienting experience. He tried again. He planted himself directly beside seat 2A, not behind it, not across the aisle, directly beside it, close enough that his presence became physical, his body taking up the space adjacent to hers, his hand returning to the overhead compartment, his shadow falling across the document she had reopened in her lap. He was not touching her. He was making absolutely certain that she could not forget he was there. "I want to be very clear," he said, and his voice had acquired a new quality. Not quite a threat, but adjacent to one, the voice of a man who is beginning to feel that he has been patient long enough, and patience is something he does not owe the current situation. "I don't know what game you think you're playing. I don't know what you were told when you booked, or what the gate agent told you, or what you think your boarding pass says. What I know is that I have a meeting on the other side of this flight worth $2 million, and I am not going to miss it because somebody decided to test the system on my seat. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" Naomi turned a page. Doug's jaw tightened. He leaned incrementally closer. His voice dropped again, which somehow made it worse than when it was loud. "Do you understand English? Or do I need to find someone who can translate, 'Get out' for you?" The sentence went through the cabin like a current, not loud, precise, directed, the kind of sentence that is designed to land exactly where it lands and nowhere else, where its meaning is encoded not in what it says, but in what it implies, and what it implies is everything. Marco's viewer count 180 people. His caption had updated to first class. "He won't stop. She won't move. Stay tuned." His hands were perfectly steady. In seat 4B, Diane Forsyth made a decision. She had been making and unmaking it for the last 8 minutes, and Doug's last sentence, "Do I need to find someone who can translate 'Get out' for you?" unmade the argument for staying quiet in approximately 1 second. She looked at Doug across the narrow aisle with the directness of a woman who has spent 34 years looking at human beings who were behaving badly and deciding what to do about it. "She hasn't done anything wrong," she said. Her voice was not loud. It was the particular voice of someone who does not need volume because they have spent decades making themselves heard without it. "She has a boarding pass. You need to lower your voice." Doug turned to her. He was visibly surprised. Not by opposition exactly, but by the source of it. An older white woman in a window seat. He recalibrated quickly. "With respect, ma'am, this doesn't involve you. When someone is being spoken to that way in a space I'm sharing, Diane said it involves me. She's being spoken to because she's in my seat." "She has a boarding pass," Diane said. "I heard her say so." The attendant looked at the system. "I saw her look at it. So there's information available here that you seem to be choosing not to use. Doug stared at her for a moment. He made the calculation that most people make when a 64-year-old retired school teacher challenges them in public, which is to decide that engaging further would be beneath him. And he turned back toward the aisle. In seat 5, a Tom Briggs had been watching this exchange with the gradually increasing discomfort of a man watching a bridge he is standing on begin to develop cracks. He did not look at Doug. He looked at his phone. Marco Reyes's post had begun to circulate. Tom had 3 contacts who had already forwarded it, none of whom knew he was on this flight. He put his phone face down on the tray table. Rosa Medina had moved forward again. She was standing at the edge of row 4 now, close enough to intervene, far enough to still be ambiguous about whether she was intervening or simply moving through the cabin. She was watching Patricia, who was at the front of the cabin, speaking into the intercom handset with her back turned. Rosa had her own handheld in her hand. She looked at it again. The system said the same thing it had said for the past 12 minutes. She looked up at Naomi's seat. Naomi was already looking at her. Their eyes met for approximately 2 seconds. Naomi gave nothing away in her expression, but she held Rosa's gaze, and in that hold there was something that Rosa recognized without being able to name, an acknowledgement perhaps that Rosa had already done something right even if she hadn't done it out loud yet. Rosa took a breath. Not yet. Not quite yet. Marco switched platforms. For what he was looking at, and he was looking at something that was moving faster than a viral travel complaint, he needed a wider reach. He posted directly, Flight 407 JFK to LHR. Man in first class demanding black woman leave her confirmed seat. She has not raised her voice. She has not moved. He has not stopped. I am not turning this camera off. Transatlantic Airways. He tagged the airline. He tagged 3 journalists he knew. He added no other commentary. The retweets started in under 90 seconds. By the time Doug Whitfield had finished his exchange with Diane Forsyth, Marco's viewer count had jumped 400-600, climbing toward 8. The comments were not slow and questioning now. They were fast and furious and specific. Don't let them take her seat. What airline is this? Someone call corporate. This is disgusting. Keep recording. Patricia had returned from the front of the cabin. She noticed Marco's phone, noticed the way he was holding it, the purpose in his posture, and crossed to his row. Sir, she said quietly, I'm going to have to ask you not to film. Marco reached into his jacket pocket and produced his press credentials in a single practiced motion. He held them out to Patricia without looking away from what was happening in row 2. Patricia looked at the credentials. She backed away. Naomi reached into her blazer pocket. She did it without announcement, without the kind of deliberate theater that would signal to the cabin that a move was being made. She simply reached in, took out her phone, and dialed a number with her thumb. Lena Cruz answered before the second ring. I'm watching the stream, she said. Her voice was as steady as if she were reading a weather forecast. Marco's at 800 viewers. You're trending in the aviation tag. Log everything from this point, Naomi said, her voice barely above a murmur. I want timestamps on every word he said, every action. The grab of the handheld, the proximity to my seat, all of it. Already done. I've been running a transcript since minute 4. Do you want the folder unlocked? A pause. 2 seconds. 3. Not yet, Naomi said. Give him one more chance. She put the phone back in her pocket. She looked up from the document in her lap. For the first time since the confrontation had begun, she turned her full attention to Doug Whitfield. She held his gaze for exactly long enough to be certain he understood that what she was about to say was not a conversation starter. It was the end of a conversation. You have one more opportunity, she said to sit down. The cabin went very still. Even the ambient sounds, The air circulation, the distant movement of luggage in the hold, seemed to recede. Doug stared at her. Something in her expression unsettled him in a way that all of her previous silences had not. The previous silences could be read as passivity, as resignation, as a woman waiting for someone else to save her. This was different. This had an architecture to it. This was the stillness of a person who already knew what the next move was. He covered it with the only armor he had left. He laughed. Short, dismissive, performative. The laugh of a man who cannot afford to look afraid. Or what he said. Naomi's expression did not change. Or, you won't like what comes next. She turned back to her document. She continued reading. The cabin did not return to its previous equilibrium. It stayed in the new place that Naomi's 4 words had moved it to. A place where something had been promised, and the question was no longer whether it would be delivered, but when. Marco's viewer count ticked steadily upward. The departure board above the jetway blinked, delayed 21 minutes. In seat 4, B. Diane Forsyth opened her novel, looked at it, and closed it again. Doug Whitfield had arrived at the particular stage of a losing position where a person's options narrow to 2: retreat or accelerate. He was not the retreating kind. He stood in the aisle beside seat 2, for 8 seconds after Naomi had returned to her document. He was aware of the cameras. He was aware of Diane Forsyth watching him from row 4. He was aware of the shifting attention of the cabin, the way the audience had begun to tilt. He was aware of all of it, and none of it was enough to override the decades of reinforcement that told him that persistence would work, that volume would work, that the application of sufficient force would eventually move whatever needed to be moved. He reached down and closed his hand around the handle of the worn leather briefcase. He lifted it. "I'll just move this for you," he said, "since you don't seem to want to move yourself." The moment his hand made contact with the briefcase, the cabin changed. The change was not gradual. It was immediate, the way the weather changes when a front moves through. One moment the air is one thing, and then the system shifts and the air is something entirely different, and there is no going back to what it was. Diane Forsyth drew a sharp breath. 3 phones went up simultaneously. Not just Marco's, but 2 other passengers who had been watching quietly, who had been telling themselves this was not their business, who apparently had found their threshold. The sounds of multiple recording applications activating filled the narrow space of the aisle like a small chorus. Rosa Medina moved. She moved quickly with purpose up the aisle from her position near row 4 past Patricia, who was still turned away, and she placed herself in the space between Doug and Naomi's row with a physicality that was surprising from someone her size. She was 26 years younger than Doug Whitfield and approximately 40 pounds lighter, and she stood in front of him as if neither of those facts was relevant. "Sir." Her voice was shaking. She could hear the shake in it, and she could not stop it, but she did not let it stop her. "Put that down right now. You cannot touch another passenger's property." Doug looked at her with the expression of a man who has been interrupted by someone he did not account for in his planning. "Who are you?" "I'm the person telling you to put it down." The sentence was not complicated. It did not require reinforcement. It sat in the air between them like a wall. Doug looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the briefcase in his hand. Then, in a movement that was slow enough to be a performance of reluctance to communicate that he was choosing to comply rather than being compelled, he set the briefcase back on the floor. He did not step back. Patricia arrived at the row 30 seconds after Rosa smoothed into the situation the way she always smoothed into situations, efficiently, professionally, with the particular energy of someone who intends to make a conflict disappear by managing both parties at once. She touched Rosa's arm. "I've got this." The words were quiet, the tone instructive. "Step back. Let the senior person handle it." Rosa stepped back. She did not go back to her position. She stood near row 3 with her arms at her sides and her hand held in her right hand and her eyes on the seat in row 2. Patricia turned to Naomi. Her voice was apologetic, professionally apologetic, the kind that floats on top of the discomfort without actually touching it. "Ms. Caldwell, I'm so sorry for the disruption. Would you mind stepping into the galley with me for just a moment? We can sort this out privately, away from—" Patricia. Naomi said her name the way she said most things, not unkindly but completely without excess. "If I step into that galley, this man will sit down in this seat, and you will tell yourself you resolved the situation. You will write it up as de-escalated. And the problem, the actual problem, will be exactly where it was, except that I will have been moved, and he will have been accommodated. That is not a resolution. That is the problem presented as its own solution." Patricia opened her mouth. Naomi continued, still in the same even register, still without raising her voice by a single degree. "I will not be stepping into the galley." Patricia closed her mouth. Doug, who had been watching this exchange with the coiled impatience of a man waiting for an opening, seized the silence. "Finally, someone with sense. Let's—" "I wasn't talking to you," Naomi said. She had not looked at him. She was still looking at Patricia. The 4 words were delivered without heat, without contempt, with a precision that was somehow more effective than either. She had simply stated an observable fact. The sentence she had just spoken was addressed to someone other than Doug Whitfield, and his interjection was therefore not relevant to it. Doug's mouth closed. Marco's viewer count 1,400. Doug made the choice, that made the choice. He looked around the cabin. He was looking for allies, for the nod of recognition for Tom Briggs in 5A or any other passenger who would give him back the sense that he had an audience on his side. Tom Briggs was looking at his tray table. The woman in 6A was looking at her phone, but not in the way people look at phones when they are scrolling, in the way they look at phones when they are recording. Doug looked at Diane Forsyth. Diane Forsyth looked back at him with an expression that offered him nothing. He turned back to the cabin. He drew himself up. He was going to land the sentence that ended this, the sentence that would make his position clear, the sentence that would communicate once and finally what everybody here needed to understand. "Look," he said loud enough to be heard in rows 1 through 7. "I've been trying to be reasonable about this. I've tried asking nicely. I've tried going through the attendance. But people like her—" "Finish that sentence." Naomi's voice, still seated, still level, not a single degree louder than anything she had said in the previous 20 minutes. But it hit the cabin like the first note of something that has been building for a long time and has finally arrived. "Go on," she said. She did not look at him with anger. She looked at him with patience, the studied, unsparing patience of a woman who is inviting something to complete itself. "Tell the cabin exactly what you mean. I want everyone here to hear you finish that thought." The silence that followed was the most specific silence of the evening. It was the silence of a sentence that could not be completed. The words were there. They had been living in Doug Whitfield for 54 years, had been spoken in other rooms to other people, had been thought in hundreds of moments that had not had cameras. But he could not say them here. Not with 1,400 people watching. Not with Diane Forsyth's eyes on him. Not with the directness of Naomi's invitation, which made the completion of the sentence feel not like aggression, but like evidence. 6 seconds. 7. That's what I thought, Naomi said. Marco Reyes captured Doug's face in that moment, not what he said, what he looked like when he couldn't say it. That image, a man frozen mid-sentence by his own cowardice, would appear on the front page of 3 major publications in 22 hours. It would become the shorthand image for the entire story, for everything the story meant. Naomi waited until the silence had settled fully. Then she looked at Doug Whitfield directly. Not with triumph, not with contempt, but with the specific quiet of a person who is preparing to deliver information rather than a verdict. Her voice dropped further, which somehow made it fill more of the cabin. "That is the last time you come near me or my belongings." She held his gaze. "The next move you make will be the last professional decision you make on your own terms." Doug's chin lifted. "Is that a threat?" "I don't make threats," Naomi said. "I'm advising you. There's a difference." She looked at him for one more second. "I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm giving you the information while you still have time to use it." She told him exactly once. One warning, calm, quiet, and unmovable as a wall. He asked if it was a threat. She told him the difference between a threat and information, and then she let him sit with it. "Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about this before you answer. If you had been in that cabin, if you had watched this man stand over this woman, invade her space, grab her property and tell her he didn't need to translate, get out for her, would you have said something? Would you have been Diane in 4B who closed her book and spoke up? Or would you have been Tom in 5A, who nodded at Doug at the beginning and spent the rest of the time looking at his tray table? Let me know in the comments, because both of those people are real. Both of those people are in every room where something like this happens, and the distance between them isn't talent or courage. It's a choice. If this story has you feeling something right now, hit that like button. Subscribe so you don't miss the ending, because what's inside that worn leather briefcase is about to change everything on Flight 407. But first, you need to understand why none of what just happened surprised Naomi Caldwell. Because she had been in this exact position before, not with the same man, with the same assumption. Naomi was 34 years old. Meridian Global Holdings was 6 years old. It had 11 employees. It had 3 active contracts and 1 acquisition in progress. A regional airline called Coastal Air based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Small carrier 12 planes, 4 routes perpetually undercapitalized and inefficiently run. Exactly the kind of asset that looked like a problem from the outside and looked like an opportunity to someone who understood what they were looking at. Naomi understood what she was looking at. She had flown to Charlotte on a Tuesday night for the final signing. Her attorney had reviewed the documents that afternoon. The wire transfer was authorized. Everything was in order. She had taken a commercial flight. Coach, because she had not yet started the quarterly reality check practice but had not yet stopped taking coach either, and arrived at Charlotte Douglas International at 9:47 p.m. Her car service was late. She was tired. She had been in meetings for 11 hours. She had a 7 a.m. signing, and she needed to sleep. She took the hotel shuttle. The shuttle dropped all 6 other passengers at the main entrance of the Harrington Hotel. Then the driver took a different exit and pulled around to a side service entrance, stopping beside a set of doors marked Deliveries and Staff. He did not explain why. He said, with the particular helpfulness of a man who has decided he's being accommodating, "This is actually easier for you." She looked at the side entrance. She looked at the main entrance, visible from where they had stopped 40 yards away. She got out. She carried her own bags through a service corridor that smelled like cleaning products and industrial carpet, emerged into a service elevator, and arrived at the front desk from a direction that clearly puzzled the night manager. The night manager asked for a second form of ID after her card processed without issue. She provided it. She was shown to a room on the 8th floor. The room was not what she had booked. She had booked a suite. The room had one window facing the interior courtyard. She called the front desk. The night manager told her that the suite she had reserved had been given to another guest who had priority status, and that he deeply apologized for any inconvenience. She did not argue. She put down the phone. She looked at the room, the single window, The interior courtyard, the desk that was not quite large enough to spread her documents across. She spread her documents across it anyway. She did not sleep. She sat at the desk and read the coastal air acquisition documents one more time, beginning to end. She marked 3 things she wanted her attorney to clarify in the morning. She ordered coffee from room service at midnight and again at 3 a.m. At 6 a.m., she showered, dressed, and went down to the lobby. She sat at a table near the front window and signed the acquisition documents at 6:47 a.m., 43 minutes before the scheduled signing alone, with the morning light coming through the glass and the hotel staff beginning to move through the lobby around her. Her attorney arrived at 6:52 a.m., slightly breathless from an early cab. She slid the signed documents across the table without ceremony. The acquisition closed at 9:04 a.m. Coastal Air became Meridian's First Aviation Holding. On her way out with her bags, the night manager, who was ending his shift, who had seen the Meridian folder on her table, who had recognized what the logo on the cover meant, appeared at the front desk. His tone had changed completely. He was warm and regretful and specific in his apology, in the way that people become specific when they realize what they were wrong about. "Ms. Caldwell," he said, "I'm sorry about last night. We didn't know." Naomi picked up the worn leather briefcase. This same briefcase, the one her mother had given her the year Meridian was founded, the one that had been with her for every signing and every board meeting and every flight since, and looked at him. "That's exactly the problem," she said. She walked out. She was still looking out the oval window of Flight 407. The tarmac, the runway lights, the dark shape of another plane moving in the middle distance. The briefcase was at her ankle, the same one. Inside it, the transatlantic board documents. Inside it, a phone with Lena Cruz ready on the other end. Inside it, everything that she had built in the years between that small hotel room in Charlotte and this seat on a flight. She owned all of it, silent and unremarkable and invisible to the man standing over her, who had decided based on everything he could see that she had no business being here. She had learned over a long time something that took most people their whole lives to understand. Power is not what you display. It is what you can afford not to display. She had never been more aware of it than right now. She reached into her blazer pocket. She took out her phone. Captain Frank Delaney had 30 years in the cockpit. He had navigated thunderstorms over the Atlantic, managed fuel emergencies over the Pacific, made the kinds of decisions at 37,000 feet that required the particular combination of technical mastery and absolute calm that not everyone who sat in a pilot's seat possessed. He was by every professional measure excellent at his job. He walked down the aisle of the first-class cabin with the easy authority of a man in his element. Broad-shouldered, silver-haired, the kind of physical presence that quiets a room when it enters. He had been called from the cockpit by Patricia via intercom. He took in the cabin in a single sweep as he moved toward row 2. The passengers with phones raised the tension in the air, the 2 focal points of the confrontation. His eyes settled on Doug first, flushed standing boarding pass in hand, then moved to Naomi, seated still, a document on her lap. His read was immediate. It was also wrong. He stopped beside row 2. His voice was professionally calm, the voice of a man who closes situations rather than opens them. "I understand there's been a seating disagreement," he said. "I'm going to need to sort this out before departure." He looked at Naomi. "Ma'am, if you wouldn't mind stepping with me toward the front. I have a confirmed boarding pass for this seat," Captain Naomi said. She had put her document on her lap, her hands resting still. She looked at him without hostility. "My name is in the system. The seat is mine." "I understand that," Delaney said. He said it in the particular way that people say "I understand" when they mean "I've heard you, but I'm not changing course." "But—" He glanced at Doug, who supplied his name with the eager speed of a man who has been waiting for someone to ask. "Mr. Whitfield also has documentation for this seat. While we resolve the conflict, standard procedure is—" Standard procedure, Naomi said, is to verify both documents and honor the confirmed booking. Your attendant has a device in her hand that has already done that verification. The confirmed booking is mine. The information is available. You don't need to move anyone to access it. Delaney's jaw tightened slightly. He was not used to being corrected on procedure by a passenger. He adjusted. I understand your position, but in order to ensure we can resolve this before Captain Delaney. His name in her mouth, she had read it from his nameplate, had a different quality than everything else she had said. Not a challenge. A clarification. I'm declining your request. I'm not stepping to the front. I'm remaining in my seat, which is the seat I booked, and which the system will confirm if you choose to check it. Doug had been watching this exchange with the patience of a man who is certain the authority figure will handle the situation correctly. He had been waiting for the captain's entrance the way reinforcements are waited for. Now, seeing that Naomi was not immediately complying, he decided to accelerate. He turned to the cabin. He was performing again, building the case for the audience that had been so frustratingly slow to come to his side. I want the people in this cabin to witness this, he said loudly enough to reach rows 1 through 7. I've been on this airline for 12 years. 12 years of loyalty. Silver status. I have spent more money with transatlantic than most people in this cabin combined. I have sat in this seat on this route and I know it, like I know my own house. And I'm being told that I have to stand here and accept that it's been given away to... He paused. A gesture at Naomi that was meant to speak instead of words. I have a $2 million meeting on the other side of this flight. I'm not asking for the moon. I'm asking for basic respect. The cabin was quiet. But it was a different quiet than before. Several passengers who had previously been neutral had shifted. The shift was the small physical recalibrations of people who have just been given a data point they did not have before the invocation of 12 years of loyalty, the implication that money accumulation was a measure of who deserved what. The gesture at Naomi that completed the sentence he had refused to complete earlier. In seat 4, B. Diane Forsyth said to no one in particular but audibly, "You should stop talking." In seat 5, a Tom Briggs picked up his phone. Marco Reyes's post had been retweeted 2,300 times. Tom's own profile was small. He put the phone face down again. Marco's viewer count 3,100. Patricia moved to the front of the first-class cabin. She picked up the intercom handset. She made the announcement that protocol required when a departure was being held. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We're resolving a seating matter in the first-class cabin. We appreciate your patience and will have you on your way shortly. The announcement moved through the plane. In economy, faces appeared at the gaps in the curtain. Curious, mildly irritated. A man in seat 14C tilted his phone toward the gap and began filming what he could see. Now the story had cameras that Naomi couldn't see and Doug didn't know about. Rosa Medina was standing at the edge of the galley. She had shown Patricia the handheld 10 minutes ago. She had shown Patricia the system confirmation. Patricia had looked at it, had looked at Rosa, and had said, "I'll handle it." Rosa had not been sure watching Patricia's body language since that handle it meant what Rosa needed it to mean. She watched Captain Delaney in the aisle. She watched him look at Naomi. She watched his posture, the angle of his shoulders, the direction of his default credibility. She pressed her lips together. Delaney returned to Naomi after a brief consultation with Patricia at the front. His voice was not unkind. It was something worse than unkind. It was final. "Ms. Caldwell, I've reviewed the situation with my senior attendant. Given the disputed nature of the seat assignment, I need to ask you to deplane while the gate resolves the booking conflict. Ground staff will assist you at..." Captain Delaney. Her voice was still level. "In 30 years of flying, have you ever asked a white male passenger to deplane over a seating dispute?" The question landed in the cabin like a piece of weight placed precisely on a scale that had been delicately balanced. Delaney's jaw worked. That's not relevant to the... It's the only relevant question, Naomi said, because the answer will tell you what this is, which is not a seating dispute. A seating dispute is two people with equal claims to a seat and insufficient information to resolve it. That is not what this is. The information exists. Your attendant has it. You've been asked to look at it 3 times. The reason you haven't looked at it is the same reason you're asking me to leave instead of him. And the question I just asked you is the question that explains that reason. So, I'll ask it again plainly. Have you ever asked a white male passenger to deplane over a seating dispute? The cabin was very still. Delaney's jaw tightened. A muscle moved in his cheek. He was not a man who was used to this, and his discomfort was legible to every person in the cabin. "She's trying to make this about something it isn't," Doug said from behind him. His voice had lost some of its confidence. The performance was fraying at the edges. Naomi did not look at him. "I don't have to make it about anything. Everyone here has already seen what it's about. Marco's viewer count 4,800. Naomi reached into her blazer pocket. She took out her phone. She looked at Delaney. "I tried to tell you," she said. "You had time." She dialed. "Ready," said Lena Cruz on the other end. "Unlock the folder," Naomi said. "It's time." Naomi Caldwell closed her document. She placed it in the briefcase with the same unhurried precision she brought to all her movements. Not theatrical, not defiant, simply deliberate, the movements of someone who has made a decision and is acting on it without excess. She closed the brass clasps. She lifted the briefcase from the floor and set it on her lap. She stood up. The cabin assumed she was leaving. The assumption rippled through the rows in the form of small involuntary relaxations. Shoulders lowering the exhale of passengers who had been holding their breath, the satisfaction of a man in 5A who had spent the last 12 minutes looking at his tray table and had just been offered a resolution he had not earned. Doug Whitfield exhaled. His hands unclenched slightly. Captain Delaney straightened the authority, returning to his posture now that the situation appeared to be resolving in the direction he had been pointing it. Naomi straightened her blazer. She adjusted the collar of her white blouse. She picked up the briefcase with her left hand. And then she did not step into the aisle. She turned, deliberately without haste, and faced the cabin. She put her back to the window and she stood facing forward, facing the rows, facing every person who had been watching this for the past 26 minutes. And she said nothing for 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a very long time to be the only person in a room not moving. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved toward the exit. Nobody moved at all. Then Naomi spoke. Not to Doug, not to Captain Delaney, to the cabin. "I'm not leaving." She said it the way she said everything, without excess, without performance, without a decibel of volume she had not chosen to use. Not because I'm being difficult, not because I don't understand the request, because the request is wrong. She looked at Delaney. "My name is confirmed in the booking system for seat 2A on this flight on this airline. I have followed every rule and process available to me. I have provided my boarding pass 3 times. I have not raised my voice. I have not moved from my seat. I have not done anything except hold the place that is mine." A pause. "And in that time I have been asked to move by a flight attendant who had already verified my booking, asked to step into a galley, asked to deplane, and had my property taken from me by a passenger who was not corrected or removed. I have watched every one of those things happen, and I've remained where I was." She looked around the cabin. Her eyes moved from face to face, not searching, not challenging, simply acknowledging the witnesses. "I am giving each of you one more opportunity to look at what has happened here and make a different choice." The silence was absolute. Then Rosa Medina stepped forward from the rear of the cabin. She walked up the aisle with her hands at her sides and her chin up and her expression showing everything she felt. The anxiety, the certainty, the awareness of what stepping forward was going to cost and the decision that the cost was worth it. She stopped at row 3. She did not look at Patricia. She looked at Captain Delaney. "Her boarding pass is valid," Rosa said. Her voice shook slightly on the first word and steadied itself on the second and stayed steady for the rest. "His is a gate-issued duplicate created in error. I checked the system when I boarded 26 minutes ago. The confirmed booking for Seat 2A is under Meridian Global Corporate Account. Transatlantic Gold status, name Caldwell. I should have said this earlier." A pause. "I'm sorry I didn't." Patricia's face went the white of someone who has just realized what information had been in the room the entire time. "Rosa," she started. "I should have said it sooner," Rosa said again. "I know." Doug Whitfield had been watching Rosa with an expression that cycled through surprise, contempt, and something approaching fear. He was running out of tools. He had tried volume and been ignored. He had tried authority and watched it side with him without resolving anything. He had tried physical force and been stopped by a 26-year-old junior attendant who weighed 120 pounds. He reached for the one tool he had not used yet. He took out his phone. He dialed a number with exaggerated confidence, placed the call on speaker, and held the phone out so the cabin could hear it ring. "Yeah, this is Doug Whitfield. I need you to call Transatlantic's executive line immediately. I have a situation on Flight 407 that needs to be handled at the corporate level. I'm talking interference with a passenger's confirmed booking, possible fraud, and—" The phone rang 4 times. 5. The voicemail message of a corporate travel department began. Doug ended the call. He tried a different number. It rang 6 times. No answer. He lowered the phone slightly. He looked at the cabin. The cabin looked back. From row 4, B. Diane Forsyth said, not unkindly with the matter-of-fact tone of a woman stating an observable truth, "Nobody's coming to help you." She picked up her novel. She set it down again. She had not read a word of it in 20 minutes, and she was not about to start. Doug looked at Naomi. He had looked at her many times in the past half hour. Every single time she had held whatever she was doing without acknowledging his looking. This time she was looking back. She was watching him with the patience of someone who has already written the last page and is waiting for the story to catch up to it. "I tried to tell you," she said. Her voice had reached its quietest point of the evening. It was barely above a murmur. But the cabin was silent enough that every person in rows 1 through 8 heard it clearly. "You had every chance." She set the briefcase on the seat beside her. She opened the brass clasps. She did not take out the folder yet. She looked up at Captain Delaney. "Are you ready to do this differently?" she asked. Captain Frank Delaney was looking at Naomi Caldwell with the expression of a man who is no longer certain of the geography of the room he is standing in. He had entered this cabin 20 minutes ago with a full account of the situation, or what he had believed was a full account. He had a passenger dispute. He had a man with a boarding pass and 12 years of loyalty and a $2 million meeting. He had a woman who was uncooperative and refusing to deplane. He had arrived with the case closed. The case was not closed. Naomi did not make him wait. She reached into the briefcase and took out her phone. Not the folder. Not a business card. Not any of the visible proof that a person presents when they need to convince someone of something. She took out her phone and dialed a number that was not Lena Cruz. It rang twice. Then a voice filled the cabin through the phone's speaker. Male measured the voice of someone accustomed to being listened to carefully. "Naomi, I've been watching the stream for the last 14 minutes. Tell me where you need me." Naomi held the phone so that the contact name on the screen faced outward, toward Delaney, toward the cabin. The screen said Robert Hale, Chairman Transatlantic. Marco's camera caught it in a single clean frame. His viewer count 6,200. His chat window detonated. Wait, is that chairman of the airline? Oh no, he doesn't know. She owns the airline. This man picked the wrong flight. Naomi's voice was even. I need you to verify my ownership status to Captain Frank Delaney on Flight 407, currently delayed at JFK. I need it on record. A brief pause. Then putting you on speaker. The sound of a room in the background. Then Captain Delaney. My name is Robert Hale. I am the chairman of the Transatlantic Airways Board of Directors. The passenger you have asked to deplane is Naomi Caldwell. She is the majority shareholder of Transatlantic Airways. She holds 54% of this airline. She is in the most direct possible sense the reason this aircraft exists, and the reason every person on this call currently has employment. I would strongly recommend that you reconsider any action you have taken in the last 20 minutes. I would also recommend that you do it quickly. The line remained open. No one in the cabin spoke. The air conditioning hummed. A luggage cart moved somewhere on the tarmac below, completely indifferent to everything happening inside. Captain Frank Delaney's face did not collapse. It did something quieter and more final. The certainty left it. It left the way the tide leaves, gradually, completely, without announcement. He was looking at Naomi the way a person looks at something they cannot take back. Patricia pressed her hand over her mouth. She looked at the handheld, the device she had been holding for 26 minutes. The device that had contained the answer to all of this since the moment she had scanned the boarding passes. She looked at Rosa. Rosa met her eyes and said nothing. She did not need to. Doug Whitfield sat down. Not in seat 2A. Nobody told him to sit down. Nobody directed him to any specific seat. He simply, in the way that air goes out of a punctured thing, moved backward down the aisle and lowered himself into seat 3B, which was empty, and sat with his hands on his thighs and his boarding pass still in his fingers and the live stream of Marco Rea's camera tilted toward him from row 3. His phone was in his lap. He was not typing. He was not calling anyone. He was looking at it the way people look at tools that have stopped working. In seat 5, a Tom Briggs had found Naomi Caldwell on his phone. Forbes, Bloomberg, a Wall Street Journal piece from 3 years ago. There was a photograph. He looked at the photograph. He looked up at Naomi. He looked back at the photograph. He put the phone face down on his tray table. He had been on this flight for 40 minutes. He had said approximately 400 words, all of them to Doug, none of them useful. Diane Forsyth in seat 4B gave a single slow nod. She picked up her novel. She did not open it. She simply held it as if the weight of it was a comfort. Marco's viewer count 9,400. His caption had updated a third time. 4 words. She owns the airline. Naomi lowered the phone. She looked at Robert Hale's name on the screen for a moment. Then she looked at Captain Delaney. She did not gloat. This was perhaps the most important thing she did in the entire 40 minutes of Flight 407's delay. She did not allow her expression to shift toward satisfaction. She did not let the reveal become a performance of vindication. She looked at Delaney with the same steady directness she had applied to everything else, and when she spoke, it was with the same unraised voice. Captain Delaney, I need you to hear what I'm about to say clearly, because what you decide in the next 60 seconds will determine what happens to this flight and to your career. Delaney said, Miss Caldwell, I had no idea. I know you didn't. She cut it off gently. Not to be cruel, to be precise. And that is the exact demonstration I have been providing for the last 26 minutes. You didn't need to know who I was. You never needed to know who I was to treat me with the basic professional courtesy you are paid to extend to every passenger on this aircraft. The fact that you are different now, the fact that your posture has changed, your tone has changed, the entire way you are looking at me has changed. Because of a phone call, that is not a solution. That is the problem in its clearest possible form. She looked around the cabin. She was not performing for the cameras. She was saying what was true. Every person in this cabin watched a man grab my property, demand my removal, tell me I don't belong here, use language that was designed to humiliate me and that stopped just short of what he would have had to answer for. And in that time, every member of this crew sided with him without... She paused. Rosa. She looked at Rosa Medina. Rosa checked the system. Rosa told the truth. Rosa is the exception. The rest of you made a choice. I want you to sit with what that choice was. Patricia made a sound. Not words. A sound. Naomi looked at her. Patricia, I know you're not a bad person. I know that what happened here tonight is not the full story of who you are, but it is a true part of the story, and it matters. Patricia nodded very slightly, looking at the floor. Naomi turned to Doug Whitfield. He was sitting in 3B with his hands on his thighs and his boarding pass no longer in his fingers. He was looking at Naomi with an expression she had seen before. She had seen it on the night manager in Charlotte. She had seen it in boardrooms and airports and lobbies, over 20 years of occupying spaces that people had decided incorrectly were not built for her. It was the expression of a man who has just discovered that the ground he was standing on was different from what he thought. You wanted to know, Naomi said. She was speaking to him as she had spoken to everyone, evenly without theater. What I could do, what the consequences were. You asked, or what? She held his gaze. Now you know. She picked up her phone. Lena Cruz ready. Flag Douglas Whitfield's transatlantic account for immediate review. He is banned from all Meridian-affiliated carriers effective now. Document this entire incident for legal. Send the report to Halloran Industrials Board. Carbon copy the General Counsel. Full incident documentation to Transatlantic HR and Compliance. Doug. You can't. That's my job. You can't. You grabbed my property, Naomi said. You invaded my physical space. You used language in this cabin that was documented by multiple witnesses and is now held on approximately 40 devices. You caused this flight to delay by 31 minutes. All of that is a matter of record, and all of it will be treated as such. She looked at him. One more time. The last time. You assumed I didn't belong here, she said. Based on what you could see, you decided my presence was a problem. You made yourself certain of that. You spent 40 minutes trying to remove me from a seat on a flight I own. A pause. I tried to tell you. I tried to. You had every chance to stop. Marco's viewer count, 14,200. He lowered his camera for the first time in 40 minutes. In the comments, she didn't yell once. And the whole time. Not once. And I'm sitting here and I can't explain why I'm crying. The cabin of Flight 407 existed in the particular stillness that follows the moment when a thing that has been building for a long time finally arrives. It was not the stillness of relief. It was the stillness of recognition, of people sitting inside the clear and unambiguous shape of what they had just witnessed and beginning to understand what it meant about what they had or had not done. Captain Frank Delaney stood in the aisle beside row 2. He had been standing in this position in various postures for the last several minutes, first with authority, then with uncertainty, now with something that looked like the aftermath of both. He was a man who had built his career on the ability to be steady in difficult situations. He was discovering at 58 years old that there were kinds of difficulty he had not practiced for, and that this was one of them. He looked at Naomi. He did not speak immediately. He took 4 seconds. When he spoke, his voice had lost the professional smoothness he had entered with and had something rougher in it, something more human. Ms. Caldwell. He stopped. He started again. I have been flying for 30 years. I want you to know that what happened here tonight, the way you were treated by this crew and the choices I made, I am ashamed of them. I made assumptions without looking at the evidence. I acted on instincts that I need to examine. You were right that I would not have asked a white male passenger to deplane. You were right that my treatment of you reflected something I cannot excuse with protocol or procedure. He paused. I am genuinely sorry. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was not warm exactly, but it was not closed. Your apology is heard, Captain Delaney. What matters now is what follows it. He straightened. What would you like me to do? First, Naomi said this flight does not take off until Douglas Whitfield has deplaned. Delaney did not hesitate. He turned to Patricia. Please coordinate with gate security for a passenger removal. Mr. Whitfield, 3B. Patricia picked up the intercom handset without hesitation. She made the call. Her voice was steady. After the call, Patricia stood at the edge of row 2. She had her hands clasped in front of her. She looked at the carpet for a moment. Then she looked up at Naomi. I followed protocol, she said. The sentence arrived with the quality of a woman testing a defense and finding it inadequate even as she says it. You followed your instincts, Naomi said. And your instincts told you he was more credible than me before you verified a single fact. That is not protocol, Patricia. Protocol would have had you read the system aloud in front of both of us the moment you scanned the boarding passes. What you did instead was make a choice about which person in this row was more likely to be right, and that choice was not made on the basis of evidence. Patricia's professional composure began very quietly to come apart, not theatrically, not in tears, in the small specific way that things come apart when a person encounters a truth they have been successfully avoiding. Her exhale was slow. Her shoulders came down by approximately half an inch. You're right, she said. I'm sorry. I know you are, Naomi said. She looked at Rosa, still standing near row 3. But I need that apology to become something that's not about me, because the reason tonight matters is not what happened to me specifically. It's what happens every time a Rosa sees something true and almost doesn't say it because a Patricia creates conditions where the cost of the truth is too high. Patricia turned to Rosa. Rosa met her eyes. The air between them was complicated. It was not repaired. But something had been named that had previously been left unnamed, and naming things is where repair begins. Rosa said quietly, Thank you for making the call when I told you. Patricia nodded. I should have looked at the system sooner, when you brought it to me. She looked at the floor again. I know. The 2 ground security staff who boarded Flight 4074 4 minutes later were professional and quiet. They did not make an announcement. They walked to row 3 and stood beside seat 3B, and they said in low voices the necessary sentences, and Doug Whitfield stood up. He stood slowly with the particular effort of a man whose legs are carrying more than his physical weight. He picked up his jacket from the seat beside him. He folded it over his arm. He looked once more at Naomi Caldwell, the worn leather briefcase on her lap, her navy blazer, her gold watch catching the light, the same way it had caught it when he had first stood over her. And his face moved through something that was not quite remorse and was not quite apology, but had elements of both. I didn't know, he said. Naomi's response was the quietest line of the entire evening, said without malice, without satisfaction, with only the level plainness of an observable truth. You knew enough. He walked up the aisle. His footsteps were measured quiet in the thick carpet. Every passenger he passed watched him go. Nobody said anything. Nobody moved toward him or away from him. The silence he walked through was the most specific kind of silence, the silence of people who have already rendered their verdict and see no reason to announce it. At the door of the aircraft, he stopped for one moment. He did not look back. Then he walked out, and the door closed behind him, and the cabin of Flight 407 was 31 minutes late and one person lighter, and the air had the quality of a room after a window has been opened in a storm that has just passed. Tom Briggs was staring at the seat back in front of him. His hands were in his lap. He would think about Flight 407 for a long time. He would think about the nod he had given Doug Whitfield in the first minute of the confrontation, and he would think about the 400 words he had said to Doug and the 0 words he had said to Naomi, and he would not entirely like what the arithmetic of that added up to. In the quiet after the door closed, a woman in seat 6A began to clap. It was not the reflexive applause of a crowd responding to a cue. It was the careful, specific applause of a single person deciding to mark something that had happened. It spread through this cabin unevenly. A few people, then a few more, never quite becoming the unanimous response of a movie. Naomi held up one hand. Gently. The applause stopped. "Please don't," she said. Not unkindly. "This isn't a performance. Think about what you saw tonight. Think about when you stayed quiet and when you spoke and what made the difference. That is the thing worth taking off this plane with you." The cabin was still. Diane Forsyth in 4B lowered her hands. She looked at Naomi with the expression of a woman who has taught people things for 34 years and who is recognizing in this moment that she is the one being taught. She nodded once. Small real the nod of a person who has received something they intend to keep. Naomi turned to Rosa Medina. Rosa was near the galley entrance, arms folded across her chest, not to close herself off, but the way a person holds themselves when they are trying to hold together the competing feelings of relief and regret, and something that might later become pride. Her eyes were bright. "Come here," Naomi said. Rosa walked to row 2. She stood in the aisle and looked at Naomi directly because Naomi was looking at her directly, and this was not a moment where looking away was possible. "You were the only person on this crew who checked the system," Naomi said. "You stood in this aisle when it cost you something real, when Patricia had told you to step back, when the easier thing was to let the senior person handle it the wrong way. That is the hardest kind of right thing to do. It's the kind that doesn't feel heroic when you're doing it. It just feels necessary." "Rosa, I almost didn't." "I know," Naomi said. "The fact that you did is what I'm talking about, not the absence of fear, what you did with it." She took out her phone. She typed something and held it up briefly so Rosa could see the screen. An email draft addressed to Rosa. Then she sent it. "You'll receive the full details tomorrow," she said. "Only if you want. No pressure in any direction." She looked at Rosa steadily. "But I think you would be very good at it." Rosa nodded. Her voice, when she found it, was small and certain I'd like to hear more. Marco Reyes lowered his camera fully and placed it on his tray table. He looked at his screen. 14,700 viewers. He thought about changing his caption. He left it. "Some things don't need more words. Every day in cabins and lobbies and boardrooms and waiting rooms, there is a Naomi sitting quietly in a seat she earned holding something that nobody around her has bothered to look at. And there is a Rosa standing near the back, watching and almost not speaking. And there is a Diane with a book in her hands making a decision about a rule she made for herself about not getting involved. This story is about all three of them. It is about what it costs to stay, and what it costs to speak, and what it costs to stay silent when something true and important needs to be said out loud. If it meant something to you, share it. Leave a like. Subscribe so we can keep bringing you the stories that matter. And if you have ever been the person in the seat, if you know what it costs to remain exactly where you are when the world suggests you leave, drop a comment below. We want to hear from you. Now, here is how Flight 407 finally flew. Flight 407 departed JFK at 12:11 a.m. 31 minutes behind schedule. Naomi Caldwell put the transatlantic board documents back in her briefcase after they reached cruising altitude. She closed the brass clasps. She turned off her reading light. She looked out the oval window at the dark Atlantic below. Black water, no visible horizon, the world reduced to the small illuminated space of the cabin and the vast, indifferent dark outside it. She thought about her mother, Irene, sitting on the front steps of a law firm in July heat arm around a 17-year-old who had done nothing wrong. She thought about a small hotel room in Charlotte the night before the most important signing of her life. She thought about a 22-year-old on her first business-class flight smiling at a man who had not deserved the smile. She did not cry. She was not the crying type. But something in her chest, something she had been carrying for a very long time, something she had built an empire around and a methodology around and a discipline of stillness around, released just slightly, just enough to feel the space where it had been. Across the aisle, Rosa Medina appeared at her row. She set a glass of water on the tray table without being asked, without ceremony, without the professional performance of service. Just placed it there the way a person places something for someone they want to take care of. Their eyes met. "Thank you, Rosa," Naomi said. 2 words. The most simply human thing she had said in 40 minutes. Rosa nodded. She moved back up the aisle. The cabin settled into its overnight quiet. By the time Flight 407 touched down at Heathrow, Marco Reyes's post had 1.2 million views. The 8-second clip of Doug reaching for the briefcase was the most shared clip of the week. Within 12 hours, it had been picked up by every major news outlet. Doug Whitfield did not make his meeting in London. He was met on his return to Cincinnati by a call from Halloran Industrial's HR department before his car reached the highway. He was asked not to come in while the company conducted its review. He never returned. Patricia Owens requested retraining within 48 hours of landing. She wrote a letter to Naomi. It took 4 drafts. She sent the 4th. Naomi read it on a Tuesday morning and forwarded it to Transatlantic's frontline training team with 1 line appended. "This is the kind of honesty we need to build with, not hide from." Captain Frank Delaney filed a self-reported incident review within 24 hours of landing, a document with no precedent in his 30-year file. At his retirement dinner 8 months later, he gave a short speech. He did not name Naomi Caldwell or Flight 407 by name, but he said this: "The moment in my career I am most grateful for is the moment I was completely publicly wrong and was given the chance to understand why. I have tried every day since to be a person who deserves that chance." 3 people in the room knew which flight he was talking about. They did not say anything. They did not need to. 3 months later, Rosa Medina stood in a conference room at Meridian Global's New York office. She was the youngest person at the table by 11 years. She was part of a 6-person advisory group working on a frontline dignity initiative that Naomi had been planning quietly for 2 years and had found on a delayed flight at midnight exactly the right reason to launch. Rosa had not prepared a speech. She said the only thing she knew for certain: "I almost stayed quiet." I think about that every day. Not with guilt, just as a reminder. Staying quiet is a choice. So is speaking. And the only reason I can be in this room right now is because I learned very suddenly at what it costs to have made the wrong one. The room was still. Naomi spoke last. She picked up the worn leather briefcase from the floor beside her chair and set it on the table. She looked at it for a moment. The softened corners, the brass clasps, the way it had been carried until it had become something more than an object, a record of every room she had entered that had tried to decide she didn't belong. My mother told me when I was 17 years old that some spaces would always try to tell me I didn't belong. She was right. She is still right. That has not changed. She looked around the table. But she also told me something else, and it took me a long time to understand it fully. She told me that belonging is not something a space gives you. It is something you carry in. She placed her hand on the briefcase. I have carried it a long time, she said, and I intend to keep carrying it until the spaces catch up. Outside the window, a plane lifted off from JFK into the early morning. Nobody in the room knew who was on it or where it was going or what was happening in its cabin. But it climbed steadily, higher and higher into the blue ordinary and magnificent, going exactly where it was supposed to go. Seat 2, A. It had always been hers. If this story moved you, please don't let it end here. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story like this one. Every share helps us reach someone who has been sitting quietly in a seat they earned, waiting for the world to catch up. Together, we make sure silence never wins. This is a work of original fiction. All characters, events, and organizations depicted are entirely fictional and created for storytelling purposes only. Any resemblance to real persons or events is coincidental.